This is Vizio's Quantum Dot television from 2018, the PQ65 F1. And today I wanted to kind of give you guys a rundown of the features of the TV as well as some of my opinions on how good or bad the TV is. First, I want to talk about inputs, and there are quite a few with this TV. You have a total of 5 HDMI inputs, and the great part is 4 of those are the newer HDMI 2.0, and that 2.0 is what you're going to need for anything that is sending a 4K signal. The 5th HDMI is an older 1.4, so you're not going to be able to use the 4K on that 5th one, but I think for most people having 4 4K inputs is probably more than adequate. And also, one of those HDMI 2.0s does have a low input lag, so if you're a gamer, that's probably a good selling point for you. You also have an older component composite style connection, so if anyone wants to hook up their VCR from 1996, you can do that. You have a USB connection, so anyone that has a Roku stick or an Amazon Fire Stick, you can plug that in directly to the TV. You have a digital audio output. You also have standard RCA stereo outputs. The one input that I wished the TV had, but it does not, is a 3.5mm or a headphone output. The one other connection that I want to mention is it does have a true RF cable connection. And prior to this model, the 2017 model and some years before, they were technically not TVs, they were technically just a display because it didn't have a tuner built into the TV. With 2018, Vizio did add that back into the mix. Okay, with the inputs out of the way, I want to now focus on the TV and specifically the things that make this thing stand out against the competition. First, let's talk about Quantum Dot. And if you're not familiar with what the Quantum Dot is, it's essentially using nanocrystals behind the scenes to give you a better picture. Vizio says it will give you a true cinematic experience. But really it's going to do two things. It's going to give you more brightness and deeper, richer colors. And I have to say, I've never experienced or had a Quantum Dot TV prior to this one. So I don't really necessarily have anything to compare to, but I can say that the picture on this TV is truly remarkable. That Quantum Dot, that increased brightness and the deeper, richer colors, one area that's really going to benefit you is with HDR signals. And the PQ65 has support for 3 different types of HDR. You have the slightly older HDR10, you have HLG, and you have the newer HDR Dolby Vision. And for anyone that watches a lot of Netflix, that's really going to be a big selling point for you because I've noticed that a lot of Netflix content that is in HDR supported is in the Dolby Vision format. So you really get to kind of get the most out of the TV. As far as how the HDR performs, it's kind of hard to say. It's not something you can turn on and off to get a before and after. But I will say that anything I watch that's in that HDR, whether it's HDR10 or the Dolby Vision, it really does look amazing, and you do get a very balanced view of that kind of lightness and darkness at the same time. So can't really show a before and after, but I can certainly say that it performs well. Next, let's talk about the local dimming, or the Extreme Engine Black Pro as Vizio calls it. So essentially, the way local dimming works is the TV is broken down into sections, and each of those sections can be kind of turned on and off on their own. With the PQ65, you actually get 192 local dimming zones, which is pretty incredible. So if you kind of imagine just a grid across your TV, and there being 192 little boxes on here, each of those can kind of fire on and off as need be. The big advantage to that is if you're watching a show or a movie that has very dark scenes as well as light scenes. So let's say you're watching a movie that takes place in space. You're obviously going to have a lot of darkness, but you'll have also a lot of light, with actors on the screen, but then space in the background. So the way that works is those true black areas are basically just going to be essentially turned off, and it helps to give you that truer, darker black. And it really goes a long way in kind of emulating what you would get with OLED TVs. So those have, most people know with an OLED you get true black because each pixel can be turned on and off. So this isn't quite that level. But I have to say, for the money, the difference that you would pay for this TV versus a OLED from like LG or Sony, it's a pretty substantial difference. And it's not as good as that, but it's pretty darn close. And with the settings on the TV, you can actually change your kind of intensity of that dimming. There's a low, medium, and a high. And as you move kind of up that ladder to the highest setting, there is a little bit of a blooming effect, which if you're not familiar with that, it's think of it like a halo around an object. So if you had just a white ball bouncing across the screen, the higher you turn that active array up, the more that ball is going to kind of have like a glowing effect to it. And some people say that the Vizio doesn't perform quite as well as some other TVs like the Samsung, who has quantum dot. But I have to say, for me, it's not something that I notice that much unless I really kind of make myself look for it. I typically keep mine set on medium and it performs great. So definitely a strong selling point for the Vizio quantum dot. A couple of other items to note. The brightness on this TV is an astounding 2000 nits, and I'm not really quite sure what nits stands for, but it's how they measure the brightness on displays. And that is as high or probably higher than anyone else in the competition. And it's almost too bright at times. You kind of have to dial it back, especially if you're in a dark room, if you're watching late at night with no lights on. To be honest, at some points or sometimes it can almost be overbearing. But if you go into the settings, fortunately they have some ways to get around that, and we'll talk about that in a minute. The other piece I want to hit on is the refresh rate on the TV. It has a true 120 hertz refresh rate, or as Vizio likes to say, it's a 240 effective refresh rate. But really that 120 is what you want to focus on. A lot of manufacturers like TCL, even on their higher end TVs, will have a 60 hertz true refresh rate. So with that 120, you're going to get less motion blur. So if you're watching high action movies or sports, something like that, as there's fast action on the screen, you're not going to get a lot of blurring. So that's something to appreciate here. Now, another feature that the TV has is, of course, it's a smart TV, as pretty much every TV is these days. And Vizio has the SmartCast operating system on here. Now, SmartCast isn't going to be quite as robust as, say, a Roku box, where you have a unlimited number of applications out there, or seemingly unlimited number of applications that you can download. You are kind of limited. There is no actual app store with SmartCast. You do get about 28 different applications installed. You get the heavy hitters like your Netflix, your Amazon Prime, YouTube, Vudu, as you can see. Redbox On Demand was recently added. So for probably 95% of the folks out there, what you get here is probably going to be good enough. Has been for me. But again, if you're the type of person that really wants that big, massive kind of app ecosystem, SmartCast OS isn't going to give you that. However, you could easily add a Roku stick and kind of get around that one. Another nice feature is the Vizio does include Chromecast. So if for some reason there's an app out there that isn't supported through their operating system, a streaming app, it more than likely is going to support Chromecast. So you can always send that signal from your phone or your tablet. You can even cast from your laptop if you want to. So Chromecast is a pretty cheap little product on its own, but the fact that they include it here is nice so that you're not having to worry about kind of getting that after the fact. The TV also supports Amazon Alexa and Google Assistant. So if you have those, you can use them to do things like turn on or off the TV, change your volume. You can even ask it to open up Netflix for you, things like that. It's not something I use, but if that's something that appeals to you, that's certainly a nice to have. And to be honest, most TVs nowadays are adding support for that type of thing. Now, the TV is not perfect. I do have a couple of small complaints and then one maybe not so small complaint. First, the Wi-Fi signal I've noticed is not the strongest. Now we have an Orbi mesh router here in the house, and it's great. It works very well with all of our phones and tablets and laptops, etc. But for whatever reason, the signal on the Vizio isn't as great as I would expect it to be. It's probably something I could live with, but it just takes a little bit longer when you're, say, streaming a Netflix 4K signal. It just takes a little bit longer than usual to kind of get up to that 4K. So personally, I went the route of plugging this in using the Ethernet connection. So I've got a direct line into the router. It was easy to do since my router is right here. If that's not an option for you, you can probably live with the going the wireless route. Again, it just takes a little bit longer to kind of get up to that true 4K streaming level. Another small complaint that I have is the upscaling. And if you're not familiar with that, essentially the TV will take a non-4K signal and try and upscale it to 4K to give you the best picture quality possible. And the Vizio isn't great at it, in my opinion. If I'm watching DVDs, which is not, which is a 540 resolution, they look good. They certainly don't look bad, but they don't look anywhere near 4K. And I, to be honest, can't really tell much of a difference with that one. I will say Blu-ray and 1080 streaming, so Netflix and Amazon. If you're watching something that's not 4K, it's just a standard 1080. They do look amazing. So really the DVD performance isn't great, and if you have kind of a lackluster cable signal, it might not look a true 4K, but otherwise Blu-rays and 1080 streaming do look amazing. So it's not going to work magic and take a 500 line video signal and just magically turn it into 4K, but it does work pretty well for the 1080 signals. The last complaint that I would have is with the side viewing angle, and any TV like this one that has a VA panel, which is used by a lot, most of the competition. Samsung has it, LG has it, almost all of the LED TVs today use a VA panel, and the drawback to that is that as you move left or right from the screen, you're going to lose contrast and you're going to lose some of that color. And the Vizio does have a enhance viewing option in there, and whether it's on or off, to be honest with you, I don't notice any difference. So I can't really knock this TV in particular for that. It's more of a knock on a VA panel, again, which is used by many companies. But it's worth noting. Now for me personally, if you're like me and you're a very picky person when it comes to the TV and the way it looks, there is kind of a workaround for that one. And what I mean by that is if you go into the menu and if you make picture adjustments, you'll see you have standard options in here, but you can also create your own options once you kind of get it calibrated to the way you like it. So my workaround for this is my settings is how I think it looks best, dead on center. So this is what I typically leave the TV on most days. However, if I'm the only one watching the TV, my chair is slightly off center from the TV. So I'll actually flip it to my setting, and you can see it's not a big difference as I flip between those two. But it's enough of a difference to me that this is kind of my workaround for that. And as far as the standard settings that come with the TV, I should also point out that it does have several options. You have standard, you have calibrated, and calibrated dark. And these are the two that you're more than likely going to want to use. They're pretty close to how I would typically set up the TV. It's at least a good starting point for most people. So if you're using the TV in a room that's dark, obviously go with the calibrated dark. If it's in a light room like we are in today, then calibrated is probably going to be your best bet. There are some other options, vivid. This is typically what TVs are left on when they're on the wall at Best Buy or somewhere like that. And it's the flashiest and the brightest and the most colorful, but it's not really a kind of a true representation, so I would personally avoid that one. Then you have a game mode and computer. So if you're hooking your computer up to here, that's the route for you. But plenty of options for you, and I'm sure somewhere in there you'll find one that works, or as I've shown, you can just set your own. One final note is the performance of the built-in speakers. They're good, they're adequate. I don't think any TV has speakers that anyone should rely on. That's why we have the sound bar. You probably do too. But if you don't have one and you have to use the TV speakers, they'll be fine. They're not going to, blow you away by any means, but they'll be adequate. So overall thoughts on performance. I love this TV. I've had it for a couple of months now, and I did have a 4K set prior to this one, but it wasn't anything quite this nice. It wasn't a quantum dot. Didn't have 3 forms of HDR, etc., etc. So this was really a big step up for me, and I have been more than pleased with it. Again, I talked earlier about how it kind of compares or rates up against the OLED TVs, and no one can say that it's as good. But again, if you talk about price point, you're talking $1,800 versus $2,500 and up, probably even more than that for OLED. So if you're willing to spend that money, then that's certainly an option. But for me personally, if you want to save $800, maybe $1,000, the PQ65 is definitely worth considering. That's my review of the Vizio Quantum Dot PQ65 F1. Again, $1,800 buys you a lot of TV, and I should have probably pointed out that 65 inch is the only offering here, so hopefully that's what you're looking for. But again, $1,800 compared to the OLED competition, which is really the only, probably the only TV I think that would outperform this one. Sony's Q9 is a good option. Samsung's Q9 is a great option, but I think this is a little bit better. And I've heard good things about the Sony, I believe, X900. So those three are pretty similar, fairly similar. But again, after a couple of months of having this one, I am not disappointed. Do not regret buying this one, and I would certainly recommend it to you. So hope you found this useful. If you have any questions or comments, as always, please feel free to provide those below. Otherwise, thanks for watching.